Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here with some information about the Plains Indians from a book called The Great Plains by Walter Prescott Webb. I'm going to start on page 52, and this is a chapter about the Plains Indians, but later on there are chapters about things like irrigation projects in the late 1890s and the 1920s and stuff like that. So it's about the Great Plains broadly conceived, and we're only going to be looking at about 20 pages or so, 30 pages maybe, selecting from 30 or 40 pages or 50. We've got some good quotes in here. I did a video on Indian atrocities, I believe it was. Native American Indian atrocities or something like that. The book that was my source for those videos was The Wild Frontier, Atrocities During the American Indian War from Jamestown Colony to Wounded Knee by William M. Osborne. I haven't selected any quotes this time from this text, but I have some wonderful quotes from the Walter Prescott Webb book. Let's go ahead then. The National Geographic, I think, is coming out with some videos right now, or a documentary or something. I saw some advertisements called The Horse and the Indian, or The Indian and the Horse, or something like that. The horse culture of the Indians, or something. Very salient point that horses and Indians got together after the Spanish brought them. We're going to get into that, but just keep that in mind. It's not true that the Plains Indians, or any Indians, North or South America or Central America, had horses. None of them did until they were brought. Interestingly, anthropologically, if you go way farther back, or I guess anthropologically, yeah, if you go really far back, you'll get horses that died out, became extinct in North America and South America, and had to be reintroduced by the Spanish. So horses were here, there are skeletons of horses, but then there's this 20 or 30,000 year gap where there are no horses. Alright, the spread and the use of the horse among the Plains Indians. Quote, the evidence tends to show that the condition of the Indians of the Plains before the advent of the horse was poor indeed. The condition of the Indians was poor. Now this goes against the people who say that the Indians were environmentally friendly, they all shared everything, they had little communistic societies where nobody had to go without, everything was communal, they used up every single thing on the buffalo, they didn't kill any more buffalo than they needed to. That's baloney. They used to drive them over the edge of cliffs if they had a chance and just take meat, and that's all they took, meat and hides if they needed them. But so that's all nonsense. But the Plains Indians were poverty-stricken in a real sense before the horse came along. The horse revolutionized, as it will tell us later, their way of life. Quote, on the plains there was a monotony of grassland shut in only by the horizon. That's an interesting feeling to look around and see that. I've been on the plains, and in fact if you look north or south from the home I grew up in Utah, there's the valleys there, or from the Rockies over to the Sierra Nevadas and past, run north and south. So you could look north and the sky met flat land where I grew up. And you just, to the left and right are huge mountain ranges, but so I didn't get the whole feeling of it. But I always had a desolate feeling when working on the farm as a young man and looking to the north or the south, driving the tractor down the field, and there was nothing I was driving towards. It was just horizon. I didn't care for that feeling. I preferred to be somewhere rather than just be at the whimsy of falling off the earth into space or something. And the pioneers skipped the Great Plains, as you know, so they didn't like that too much either. The pioneers did the woodlands, then they took wagon trails across to California and to Utah and Oregon, and then later on they sort of filled in, nibbled at the edges of the Great Plains and moved into it. But let's continue. So that it's grassland shut in by the horizon, that's it. Quote, in this desolation the Indians stalked their game or made a surround in an effort to secure enough food for subsistence. They're not very fast. They're on foot. Now they have to catch rabbits or buffalo or deer or coyote or something like that. So it was a rough time they had of it. But everywhere they had to walk. The rivers were few and uninviting. Now the Mississippi is not in the Great Plains. The Great Plains starts west of the Mississippi. Some people think of, there's the East Coast, the Appalachian Mountains, and then there's the Great Plains, and then there's the Rockies. But there's a huge expansive territory in there. And it goes from woodland all the way up to the Mississippi, and even past the Mississippi quite a ways is woodland. So the rivers that you're talking about in the Great Plains are not the ones involved in the Great Mississippi Valley. Of course they all are, they do drain into the Mississippi, but those are drier up on the Great Plains. Some of them are even seasonal. They're shallow. In dry years, the ones that aren't seasonal can sometimes run dry. So there wasn't much that they could do, even if they used the rivers to some extent. They're on foot almost all the time, period. The plains had no agriculture and supplied little or no wild fruit and no nuts. Now there you go, is the ancient human diet on the African savannas. Fruits and nuts and a little bit of meat. And there was virtually no wild fruit, and there were no nuts at all. The Indians were dependent on game, and although game was not scarce, it was, with the single exception of the stupid buffalo, the wildest and most wary on the continent, and could be approached only with the greatest difficulty. Pause there. The stupid buffalo. He did say that. Alright, the wildlife here is wild and wary of people, because on the plains there's no place to run, there's no place to hide, so animals are definitely going to be more wary. In the forest, you can dodge behind trees, under a log. You know, there's different things to do in a forest than out on the expansive grassland where there's nothing but 1,000 miles in any given direction. So things are going to be very, very wary, and the Indians, again, on foot, had a rough time of it. Then came the horse. The presence of the buffalo before the horse in such countless herds made the existence of the Plains Indians possible. So they relied on the buffalo not because they were brilliant naturalists, environmentalists who found this great resource. They relied on the buffalo because it was stupid, slow, they could get it, they could kill it, and there was virtually nothing else out there. They were a buffalo culture because of their poverty. They were not a buffalo culture as a brilliant technological feat of genius, like some people put it over. You know, they built their houses out of the buffalo, they made jewelry out of buffalo, they cooked campfires with buffalo, everything's buffalo dung for campfires, everything's buffalo. Brilliant. No. Poverty. Poverty. That's why they had to count on the buffalo so often. Alright. So then came the horse, and overnight, so to speak, the whole life and economy of the Plains Indians was changed. Steam and electricity have not wrought a greater revolution in the ways of civilized life than the horse did in the savage life of the plains. I don't know about that. I would be willing to listen to some debates, pro and con. Which one forced a greater revolution in the ways of life? Steam and electricity, or the horse for the Indians? Interesting. So important was the horse, in the plains culture, that the anthropologists have named the period extending from 1540 to 1880 the horse culture period. Practically all that scholars know about the Plains Indians comes from this period. The pre-Columbian time is one of conjecture. Now, that's interesting. People say the Indians have their own culture and their own history and their own oral traditions and stuff, and their ways of life and their language and their traditions have been handed down through generations. Well, in fact, the Indians knew less about their history than the white man did at any given period after we had gotten here. They were able to keep less accurate track of the goings-on in their culture than white men were able to after we met. And what do you think it was like before we got here? Do you think they had really great historical oral traditions? No, they were clueless. For example, when asked where they got sign language, there's this sign language we're going to talk quite a bit about later. Where did they get that? One of the chiefs was asked once by a military general from the United States, where did sign language develop? Who was the first to use it? You know, and he said, well, it was a gift from God. God gave it to us so we could speak to each other.